Christene Marie. Tonight we are talking about a very, very important topic, probably one of the most important topics for a business owner. And that is addressing the question of what matters more than gross profit. And so before we get into the answer, I just want to give a quick recap of some of the things we've been covering on these shows over the last couple of weeks. And, we've talked about your vision. Where are you heading? What's your goal? Is it sell, scale, exit, succession? Which of the three S's, so to say, sale, scale, or succession, are you aiming for? And that's really important to note because where you're heading is where you're going to impact the day-to-day. Those decisions are effectively guiding you towards somewhere. And if we don't have clarity of where we're going, there's no way we're going to be able to make the proper decision today, right here, right now in the present for the future. So getting clarity about where we're going and why we're heading there, the why is really what keeps us going when the times get tough. There's actually been discussion in our family business. So I'm coming from the family business owner perspective, as well as the perspective of fractional chief marketing officer working with pretty big trades businesses, as well as the vendor perspective, offering digital marketing services for trades businesses, as well as the customer perspective. So there's a lot of perspectives and different hats I've worn over the last few years, even just growing up as a child of the trades. Watching my dad and watching the decisions he made and the way he interacts with customers, the way he's led the team. This past Saturday, our family, my dad and I actually co-hosted an event for men and women in the DC, Washington metro area who were leaders in the community, but also our team showed up. And some of these folks I actually hadn't seen in a long time, and it just reminded me, some of you I grew up with, I literally grew up with these kids playing in our pool together as children when our parents, our dads were working together. And so it was a really cool moment to just realize this is the culture that my dad created in the trades. And so also having the child of the trades perspective, watching my dad do it and see it, how it impacted us as children, really changes as I'm going to be taking the family business into the fourth generation, and also how we're guiding other businesses today, being on the receiving end of services and also kind of working behind the scenes and behind closed doors with a lot of different owners, seeing what they struggle with, hearing the questions asked by private equity companies to the business itself. So a lot of different perspectives that I've seen and experienced over the last few years that have really, really shaped the way that I guess you could say I show up, and the questions I ask our customers. So to that point, the one of the things that's really, really important as we're having this discussion tonight is having clarity around where you're going and why that's your goal. As I was kind of sharing, I'm speaking from the owner perspective. When my brother and I were both partners in the family business, he talked about selling it multiple times. And I'm like, no, I want to take this thing into the fourth generation. And I just have this vision for Gen 4, what's possible and where we're going and what could be. But if my brother and I are at odds, having very different visions of the future, we're going to be conflicted in the decisions we make today. So having not just clarity of vision, but also us being on the same page, and then having a really clear why. Me being able to share with my brother, this is why I want to keep the family business in the family. That why I think compelled him to understand where I was coming from. That doesn't mean he still doesn't recommend it sometimes. Hey, we could sell this thing. But at the same time, man, it has been such a journey and such an exciting thing to work with my dad, work with my brother, and also get to know the trades from literally the inside out. And so tonight, as we're having this conversation, we are doing a bit of reflection on where we've come from, because some of those previous conversations do set the stage for this conversation tonight of what is more important effectively than gross profit. So where are you heading? Why? Is there agreement at the highest level in the business? Do all the partners, all the family members, does everyone agree on where you're going and why you're heading there? That's number one. Another aspect that we've talked about is really diving into addressing and identifying where are there leaks in the buckets. I like to think of the customer journey as effectively each department, each stage of the customer experience is a bucket in and of itself. And so you've got the bucket of the call center, you've got the bucket of sales, you've got the bucket of effectively the proposal stage, which can include back office, which is designing, developing. For one of our clients, they get their engineers involved. And then you've got production. And then the final bucket is, okay, you're done. What happens next? And the way that I think about it is that once the lead comes in, water pours into the first bucket. Marketing has dumped water into the call center. What does the call center do with that lead? How do they pass it on? They pick up their bucket and they pass it over to sales. Sales picks it up, they do their job, then they pass it down to the proposal stage. How much water is leaking between every single department? And this question is so important, because if we're not aware of our own leaks, just the other day I had someone come on, his name was Bennett Lebowitz, and he and his company work with owners to prepare their business for exit. And sometimes the businesses themselves don't even do the exit. In fact, Bennett said 70% of businesses that go to market, 70 to 80% that go to market to sell, do not end up selling successfully. That's staggering, one. Two, the tenets, the core pillars of what constitutes a business exit-ready company is the very same that's necessary in so many ways for the sale, yes, but also for the scale, for the succession. Are we building something that's not tied to us, that's not attached to us, that can function whether we're in the business or not? Because for so many of us, and I'm speaking from personal experience, from both sides, I've got the marketing agency for the digital, the digital marketing for the trades, and then also the trade business itself. It is so easy to just be boots in the ground and like knee deep in the business. And there's benefits, pros and cons to that. But man, the more I'm able to operate outside of the business and the more the business can function without me, the more I've got an entity, a real living, breathing business that I can then pass on, scale, or sell. And so as we're thinking about where we want to get to and why, we also need to be thinking, what are the leaks? Effectively doing due diligence now. What are the questions people are going to be coming in and asking? Okay, well, how can I be preemptive and ask those myself? How can I be analyzing this business as a potential investor? Would I invest in this business today? That's a hard question. And the more you and I can ask that and answer it honestly, the more it's going to help us to identify the gaps, the leaks, and the opportunities for growth to get us to that next level. So to this question, what matters more than gross profit? Well, it depends on what your vision is and where you're heading. If you're building a business for succession, what matters more than the gross profit is actually maintaining relationships, which is a bold-faced statement given that everyone always thinks about gross. Everyone is obsessed with gross, but how many relationships are being lost along the way because you're obsessed with gross? That's a really, really important question, especially if you want to have a family generational business. Even if you want to have your family relationships sustain through the sale or the scale of the business, relationships will always take precedence. But if you are wanting to scale the business or sell it at some point, maybe it's getting an investor involved, maybe it's getting a partner involved. A friend of mine, they're going out and just buying 5% of businesses just to have like a piece of the pie. I love that. And they're offering bookkeeping services. Like there's kind of a trade-off, like, hey, let us come in and we're going to be CFO, fractional chief marketing officer. We're going to help you on the financial side. A lot of people are doing this in different ways, shapes, and forms. And so to this question of what matters more than gross, relationships, especially in the family side, if you're looking for succession, but even beyond that, scale or sale. Next, and this really is kind of the heart of the matter. I'm going to get to the answer here. I was in a business. I was serving as chief marketing officer, and they actually brought in a private equity company. And about a year in, I started being aware that this was happening behind the scenes. Thank God I really mean this. Thank God that they brought me in. Their data was abysmal. They had no numbers. They had no numbers around their sales. They had numbers around sales, but not around their customers. Like who is doing what service and where did they come from? They had no attribution. So they had some numbers in the CRM, but there wasn't much visibility into like percentage of jobs lost in terms of like actual jobs lost, not just sales lost, but jobs. For example, I asked, the IT guy, go pull the data for me from years past of projects that were actually canceled. Come to find out, 11% of all jobs were canceled for that year that we looked at. That's huge. Private equity is going to want to know that. So now, after being involved for a year, we had data-driven decisions and business goals that we were establishing as a result of having clarity around the numbers and also clarity around where our most successful sales were coming from. Because before they had just been kind of throwing a whole bunch of marketing dollars, literally like $1.2 million at marketing, but they weren't sure what was working and why. And so as we started diving in, we realized, man, we got to stop paying for this. And immediately we saved them $125,000. Another marketing channel that they were investing in, we found out we ended up actually paying for the lead to be brought in. It was insane. The cost of the sale was $1,800, whereas the cost of the lead was $180. So it was kind of insane what was happening. Here's what happened, is that as I dove deeper and deeper and deeper into the data, I realized that year over year for the last 6 years, they had been growing year over year. Their gross, they had an upward trend line for gross. They also had an upward trend line for net. I'm sorry, no, they had an upward trend line for leads. So leads and gross every single year were looking great. Like even the year prior to me getting involved, it was like shining numbers. Here's what's crazy. Because they didn't have firm data tracking, they didn't really have any clue how many leads they were actually bringing in. And then here's the other thing. When you looked at the bottom line, and this is the number that's more important than your gross. When you looked at net, what was actually left? What was actually after cost of goods? After you're paying for the supplies, after you're paying the team, after you're paying leadership, after you're paying the back end office, after you're paying for the vehicles, what's left? Their net, while gross was skyrocketing, while leads were skyrocketing, their net was declining pretty significantly. And when we got involved, this is what was wild. When we got involved, their leads for the first time took a dip, but for the first time in 6 years, their net took an uptick. It was wild looking at the graphs. And so, y'all, what matters more than gross? Their gross grew as well, working with us, but for the first time, they saw a reversal and their net finally went positive. So, y'all, when you're looking at the numbers for marketing, what matters more than just the lead costs? What's the cost of the sale? What matters more than the gross for financials? What's the net? What are the actual bottom line numbers in each category? What's your number one KPI for your salesman? What's your number one KPI for production? What's the number one KPI for marketing? What's the number one KPI for the overall business? We need to get so clear on how we measure and define success for every single one of those buckets. For the marketing department, the call center, sales, design, proposal phase. I mean, even today, I was talking with a couple of business development managers for one of our clients. They said that they've continuously priced out their competitors by one of their bids was $1 million over their competitors. It's a big problem. They're never going to win jobs that way. So you've got to have a KPI for the proposal department. What's the KPI for production? What's the KPI for after? Who of those customers, after they've successfully completed their service, how many of them are actually leaving a positive Google review? What percentage of them are actually referring customers to you? One of our clients had a 22% referral rate. That's awesome. That means that for 22% of our entire customer base, we're not paying for it. We're just making our customers happy and then they're sharing about us. So y'all, what are the KPIs for every single bucket in your business? With that, thank you so much for joining. I will talk to you tomorrow and we'll have a great conversation. In the meantime, have a good evening and I will